Hello again. We are going to be talking today about major scales and some of the things that are related to that topic. So it's important that by now you're very comfortable with your pitches and your notes on the staff because we're going to start using that all the time for all kinds of things that we do. So if you're still a little shaky on what note names are and where they go and how clefs work, go back and rewatch that video and do a bunch of memorizing to make sure that you are solid on those things. That'll be really, really helpful as we continue to move forward. Okay, so a major scale is a type of scale. So let's talk about what a scale is. A scale in music is a pattern of pitches, usually ascending from like one note to another note. So the most common types of scales we have are major scales and minor scales, but there are all other kinds of kinds of scales that you can have. Some of them have fun names like octatonic and pentatonic and things like that. We won't get into that this semester, but you will eventually learn about those things, and they're kind of cool. So starting with major scales, a major scale has 7 different pitches. It uses one of each letter name in the scale. So I'll show you what I mean. Let's use a bass clef to start with. And I'm going to start on C, and I'm going to write a scale that starts on C and also ends on C, and I'm going to use one of each letter. So I started on a C, I have a C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then I have a repeat of a C again. So there are 7 unique notes in this scale, one for each letter name. One thing I want to just have as a little aside, you'll notice that that C on top doesn't have its own line, like the staff doesn't extend that far up. This sometimes happens where you have notes that need to be higher or lower than the staff will allow. And when that happens, we just draw our own line to kind of show that, oh, there's another line above this one. Theoretically, we just didn't have it actually written out because you don't want your staff to be too big, like too tall. So you only use 5 lines at a time, but if you need a 6th line, you can kind of add it in yourself. So what I did here was I drew my own line, and then I put that note on the line, just as I would put the note on any other line. And that shows that it's a step up from this B here. So this B rests on the staff just fine, but the C above it needed an extra line. If I didn't put that line there, it would just look like another B. So this shows that it's a step up from B. And this little line here, we call that a ledger line. You can use as many as you need to. So if I needed to get up really high above the staff, I could use several of them. That would be an acceptable way to notate that note. And to figure out what note it is, I could just start and go up so I know that the top line is A. And I could just count lines and spaces by steps. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That top line is a G. So if I'm in bass clef and I need to show this G that's higher than the staff, I can notate it this way. But this might be an instance where I'd want to use a different clef. So it just kind of depends on the situation. You can also use them below. So I could go all the way down the staff like this, under the staff with ledger lines. You'll notice that the note I wrote wasn't actually on a line. That's totally fine. I still needed the lines to show me how low this note is, though. It's just a space note. So if I start on the bottom line, which is G, and I count down, G, F, E, D, C, B. The line in this, the note in this space is a B. So that's how ledger lines work. Notice that I didn't draw another line underneath, like I didn't do this. This still kind of shows the same thing, but this line is unnecessary. I can show the B connected to the line above it. I don't need the line below supporting it as well. So whenever we can eliminate ink or or pencil on the page. In notation, a general rule of thumb is that less ink is better. So if I don't need that line to show what I need to show, then I'm not going to use it at all. So this is not what we would do. Okay, so that was a little extra lesson you got about ledger lines. But anyways, okay, so let's go back. So here we start on C. We go all the way up by step to C. None of the letter names are repeated. Each of them is used once and only once. So major and minor scales both follow that pattern. Not all scales follow the stepwise pattern, but major and minor ones do. So what makes major scales specifically major? Well, that's an excellent question. So let's talk about that. The pattern of whole and half steps that we have is unique to major scales. What I've written out here, C, this is C major, so I've written a major scale on C. There are no accidentals at all needed for a C major scale, and I'm going to show you that the pattern that we have. So we have whole steps and we have half steps, and they're arranged in a very particular way. So we start on C and we go up a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So if you looked on a piano, you would see that between all the white keys in the piano, this is the pattern. You have a half step in between E and F, that's where the white keys are touching each other without a black key in the middle. And same with B to C, that's where the white keys touch without a black key in the middle, so you have a half step there as well. So I can take this pattern of whole and half steps and I can apply it to starting on any pitch, and I can get a major scale. So because the pattern is consistent, all major scales sound the same. Like they start on different pitches, but they have the same relationship to each other. So that's why, like, if you, if you hear a song in one key and then later you hear the same song in another key, it still sounds like the same song because there's always this consistency of the pattern. So let's go ahead and we'll use bass clef again, and let's start on a different note and see if we can just write out a major scale using the pattern of whole and half steps. Now, sometimes we're going to have to use accidentals to make these work out. And I don't have a keyboard with me right now, but you should, if you don't have a picture of a keyboard with you, you should pause this video right now, go grab one or look one up on Google so that you can follow along, because that's the easiest way to see where your whole and half steps are, is by looking at where the white and the black keys fall. It's hard to do that in your head, especially at first, so I recommend that you check out a keyboard. Alright, so staying in bass clef. Let's say I want to write a major scale that starts on A. So I can start on A. I need to go up a whole step. If I go up a whole step from A, I get a B. If I go up a whole step from B, I get either a C sharp or a D flat. So it's that black key in between C and D. But I know it can't be a D flat, because if it were, then I would end up with this. So if I played that on the piano, it would sound fine, but it's not notated correctly. See how I skipped over a C? I need to use every letter name once and only once. So I cannot notate this like a D. It has to be some kind of C. So C sharp it is, okay? Now is where my half step falls into place. So I need to go up a half step from C sharp. I'll get a D. And then I go up a whole step. I get E. Another whole step is F sharp. Okay, so now we're on F sharp and we have to go up another whole step. So you can count up 2 half steps. One half step gets you to G. A second half step gets you to G sharp. So a whole step up from F sharp is G sharp. then this is the last one. A half step up from G sharp is A. And you can check because your top and bottom notes should always be the same note. So I have an A at the bottom and an A at the top. If I had a different note at the top, that would mean that my somewhere my pattern got messed up. So I could then go back and check and see where I made the mistake. So it's a nice way to be able to check yourself. So I have here an A major scale. So if I was going to label this scale, I could just write out A major, or I could use a little shorthand that we like to use. If you write a capital A, capital M, that denotes A major. Whenever we're working with major, we always use the capital M. It's kind of a universal music thing that we do. So if I was going to label the scale above the first one we did, I would label it like this. For C major. Okay, so that's how you build a scale. So you can start on any pitch and build it using this pattern. I want to do one more with you, and then I'll show you another way to go about it. So here I just went note to note. But if you're having trouble remembering that you need to use every note once, sometimes it's helpful just to write out the note heads on the staff first and then add accidentals where you need to. So if let's say I want to do E major, let's do E flat major. That one's fun. So let's do a treble clef this time. I'm going to go ahead and label that before I write it. Okay, so I want to write an E flat major scale. So what I could do is start on E and just write all the notes from E up to E, like one on each line in space, and that way I won't get off at all. And I'm going to leave a little space between each note in case I need an accidental. Okay, so now I have all the notes represented, and now I just need to kind of fill in the blanks. So I know I start on E flat, so for sure I'm going to put a flat on that E. So then I would just go up the pattern. E flat up a whole step is what kind of F? Well, it's an F. F up a whole step is what kind of G? Just a G. G up a half step is what kind of A? It's an A flat, actually. So I'll add my flat there. A flat up a whole step is what kind of B? Well, it's a B flat. B flat up a whole step is what kind of C? It's just C. C up a whole step is what kind of D? Just D. And if we did this right, then D up a half step should be E flat again, and it looks like that's correct. So don't forget that last flat. If you start on E flat, you have to end on E flat also. Okay? So there's our E flat major scale. So that's another way to think about it. If you want to write out the notes first and then add accidentals, that's fine. Or if you like doing the accidentals and notes together as you go, that's also fine. But just make sure you follow the rules about the pattern and also about each note happening one time, each letter name happening only one time. Now this is just what I would call a one octave scale because it only spans from E flat to the next E flat up. But I could continue the pattern. I could start over on the high E flat that I had here, and I could keep going up to the next E flat, and then we would call that a 2 octave scale. So if you have ever taken music lessons, or if you're currently taking music lessons, then you've probably heard your teacher say, all right, next week come back and play the 2 octave scale, or something like that. And that's all they mean. You're just going to go, instead of hitting the beginning note, one time at the end, you're going to go up again. If I were to actually do that here, I would have to use a lot of ledger lines because almost all of my notes from here on up are going to be off the staff. So I'm not going to do that, but you can try it if you want and see how that works. You just follow the pattern of whole and half steps again. Okay, so that's ascending scales, major scales. If I want to come down the scale, this is really important. When you come down the major scale, you do not use the pattern. You do not use whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. You just use the same notes that you just played. So if I went down a whole step from here, I would not get D, and it would get all messed up after that. So it's like you have to follow the pattern backwards if you're going to do that. So it would be half first, then whole, 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 then half, then whole, whole. But I like to just think about it as I wrote it correctly going up, I'll just use the same notes coming back down. So if I wanted to do that, I would just go ahead and repeat and put all the accidentals in their proper places. Just like that. So if I write a correct descending major scales, then you should be able to start here and count up our pattern and get the right thing. So whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So that's a way you can check. Okay, so it's a good idea to be able to do this in starting on any note in either clef. So this is a good time to practice those sort of things, and I'll for sure have you do some of that for homework as well, so you can look forward to that. Whenever we have these scales, sometimes the scale will literally show up in music, but usually melodies are made up of different combinations of these pitches, and so often if you are like if you hear a piece or song that you like, usually most of the notes come from one scale. So if I were going to write a melody, I could use all the notes from the E flat major scale, or maybe not all the notes, but I could use only notes from the E flat major scale. It doesn't mean that I would have to only use these notes in treble clef. I could use other E flats and other C's and other A flats and so on, like in any register at any point, high or low. But if I use only kind of the note names that are represented in the scale, then I could say that this piece is in E flat major. So when you talk about something being in a key, that's kind of what we mean. We mean that it's most of the notes are taken from that scale. So if you hear someone say, "Oh, this is in C major," what they mean is most of the notes, sometimes all of the notes, and sometimes just most of them, are taken from the C major scale. Now there's a little more complication to it than that, but that's one of the things that generally means, a good way to start thinking about it. So I could say this is a scale in the key of E flat major. So when we're talking about scales, we're also sort of talking about keys. And so that's why scales are important, because you end up understanding what notes kind of belong together in a group. So if I was going to use notes in E flat major, then I would use all the notes that belong in the E flat major scale. So it's really interesting once you start learning how these things work, and the fact that you have, the same pattern in every major scale means that every major key then also sounds similar. So if I were to sing something to you in A major, and then later I sang the same thing to you in E flat major, you might hear that I started on a different note, but you wouldn't be able to tell a difference between the melodies, because all of the patterns of the whole and half steps and all of the distance between all the notes would be the same, even though I started in a different place. So that's kind of how major keys work. And of course we'll keep talking about that as we go. So that's mostly what I wanted to talk about in this video, so I hope this was helpful. Do practice writing some major scales. If you're ever unsure about any of this, you want to take a screenshot of something you've been working on and send me an email, and I'd be happy to check it out and let you know how you're doing, give you some tips, so feel free to do that. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.